Hey, buddy, watch this.
Yeah, if anybody familiar with that scene in the intro will know that's one of the worst CGI shots of all time. And in this video, we're going to talk about the worst cards in Saviors of Uldum. So it seemed like a nice fit. Now, when I say the worst cards, I am using data from HS Replay to support that. These have the lowest deck win rates and the lowest played win rates, some combination thereof, among all cards in the expansion so far. I'm not condemning these cards forever, saying they're never going to be played. Most of them probably won't, but there's a handful here that still have some hope in future metas. I'm just identifying the cards that have not succeeded at all yet, and it seems like you're actively hurting decks anytime you try to make these cards succeed. That said, let's go ahead and jump quickly into this list. So starting off at the number 10 spot, it's Anka the Buried, widely considered the worst legendary from Saviors of Uldum, and most of them are pretty good. Anka is one of those cards that I certainly haven't given up on yet, and in fact, I actually saw somebody play a list with Anka to Legend this morning, like maybe a few hours before you're going to see this video. So that might be an indication that she's already starting to turn the corner. I'm still leaving her on the list because the data I've looked at so far doesn't prove it. That's a one-off case, but we'll keep a close eye on that style of deck, a Death Rattle Zephyrus Rogue, to see if it gains any momentum. Maybe Anka will quickly move up the ranks, but for now, she's proven to be a little bit too slow. It turns out Rogue can't play really slow games successfully. Anka takes a while to get moving and get spinning. Often the discounts just come too late to matter. So although she can do a really powerful thing with big time discounts, for the class and for the style of play, it just hasn't lined up yet. I'm hopeful. There are signs, but for now, Anka, still the worst legendary in Uldum. So moving on here to Imp Bombing, we've got a removal card here for Warlock with a really big downside. As we've seen in the past with cards like Psychic Scream, turns out shuffling really bad stuff into your deck is a big problem. Like, you don't want bad draws. You want your draws to be meaningful, and worthless imps are indeed pretty worthless. And when there's 3 of them, that's adding a lot of inconsistency to your deck. You could top deck those a couple turns in a row, and you've basically lost a game just because you couldn't find enough resources. Now, Warlock is a class that can get through that problem better than most, and I'm actually hopeful for this card as well. I don't think this will be worthless forever. There might be a Highlander style deck that can include a one of in here that needs an early answer to a really aggressive minion if a meta supports that kind of thing, or if they have enough draw, or maybe filters to move demons or low cost stuff out of their deck. Who knows, right? There's all kinds of ways to make this downside go away or minimize the impact of it. And then you have a 4-mana removal spell, which is something we've seen be successful in Hearthstone's past. So right now, it absolutely is not working. Those conditions of the meta don't line up. This card's very punishing to play, but I'm not hopeless for this card yet. Moving on to Mogu Cultist. I'm pretty sad to see this one on the list, I have to say, because it is a meme dream card, but man, getting this to work sure hurts your deck. You have to compromise in so many different ways to make this card successful. And so far, pretty obviously, we haven't seen a real meta competitive deck do that. There are all kinds of lists that can get this to go off. That's why I didn't put it even lower on the list, but none of them are competitively viable. You lose way too many percentage points when trying to do this. So it's an awesome card, a great design, super fun. It just requires a lot of conditions to be met, tons of setup, and therefore usually far too slow and awkward to ever work in a faster world of Hearthstone. That said, another card that has such a high upside, some deck list might solve it eventually and make it at least a little bit playable as like a tier 3 or tier 4 deck. Moving on to Conjured Mirage. This is one I'm a little bit surprised to see on this list, frankly. I thought this card had a lot more potential as a kind of like Doomsayer or Frost Nova stall card, where you just play it and your opponent doesn't want to trade their board into it, so maybe they just lose an entire turn, so it's like freezing their board like a Frost Nova, and a 4-mana Frost Nova that any class can run could be a good sort of thing. Alternatively, if they trade into it, it just takes a ton of great trades and you get a great stat body for the 4 cost, and it's also got some anti-fatigue style stuff going on as well. So I figured between those 3 use cases, somebody would figure out how to use this card. We've actually played it somewhat successfully in like a Silence Priest list, utilizing its high health total to silence it and then set up Divine Spirit Interfire combos. That worked okay. It's certainly not a tier 1 deck by any means. Very fringe playability, but nobody else has figured out a way to use this thing successfully either, and that means right now when you look at its win rates, it's pretty abysmal. Shocking, maybe the most shocking of all the cards on this list to me. Most of them are kind of throwaways you'd expect, but with Conjured Mirage, I hoped more for this card, and I still guess I do. It feels fine when I play it, so another card to keep an eye on. Moving on here to Plague of Madness, the Rogue Plague, and a lot of people complained when this one was first revealed. First off, it didn't meet the kind of description of plagues in that they were things that were going to affect all the minions on board. Plague of Madness doesn't do that. It's just giving each player a knife, so it both went against the flavor or fantasy of plagues, but also just doesn't deliver a lot of fun gameplay. It's kind of cool. I still think it's interesting to, trade into big stuff of your opponents. Your opponent may not have as much opportunity to trade with their poisonous knife if you're either not running minions or running low cost stuff or things that aren't particularly susceptible to poisonous. Like, there is a world where you can set up those aspects that make this favorable for you, even though it's a symmetrical style effect. The downside is you want to kill big stuff, and Rogue can't really afford to tank big stuff because they don't have enough late game, they don't have enough healing. So killing like mountain giants with a Plague of Madness still feels really bad. So between that and other just weapons and the quest for Rogue that's giving you a weapon, there's not really any reason to run Plague of Madness right now, and trying to do so really tanks your win rate. So this card is more problematic for Rogue than helpful, which is pretty unfortunate for a card that was supposed to be, a standout kind of mechanic or idea for the class this set. Plague of Madness falls really, really far short. Moving on to Vilefiend. It's a 2-mana 2/2 demon with lifesteal, and that's not really that exciting, it turns out. Not an amazing stat line here. Demons in the neutral set are really hard to utilize. Even Warlocks don't have great ways to use demons right now, and they probably have better demons at the same cost if they do. And lifesteal as its own keyword just doesn't do a lot in Hearthstone. We've seen this time and time again. Cards that just have lifesteal aren't that good. Now, lifesteal in Rush, okay, now we're talking. That's intriguing, right? Lifesteal and Reborn is even working in Paladin a little bit because it's so sticky. But when your opponent can so easily resolve something like this and it doesn't have a ton of upside, it's just a bad 2-drop, right? Like, almost anything is better. A 2/3 is better than Vilefiend in 90% of cases because it's just going to trade better and prevent more damage in the long run than this lifesteal could anyway. So essentially a card here that's just really flat and boring across all elements. It doesn't stand out in any particular way. Nobody really needs to use this thing, and anybody that tries seems to pay the price because its win rates are really bad. So now at the number 4 spot, we have Living Monument, a 10-mana 10/10 with Taunt, which, theoretically off something like Frightened Flunky, maybe you can drop this every once in a while, but as a card you'd run in your deck, this one's just way too slow. There are so many better Taunt bodies from a cost efficiency standpoint, right? 5 and 6 and 7 mana taunts do what you need them to do. They don't require your entire turn, and they're far less susceptible to single target removal because you're committing way less mana to them. So Living Monument just fails. Certainly fine in things like Arena, I guess, from time to time. Better than some of those old 10 drops we used to get, like Faceless Behemoth, that didn't have taunt. So from a Arena style throwaway garbage card, whatever you want to call them, this one's better than most, but still really, really bad. I don't know how big a 10-mana card with Taunt would have to be playable. Maybe 15, 15, 20, 20, but 10/10 is not the threshold because this card just doesn't work. So moving on here to the card featured in the intro, it's the Wasteland Scorpan. It's the Rock. It's the Scorpion King, a 7-mana 3/9 poisonous beast in the neutral set. Just doesn't do anything, right? Like, this card is so freaking awkward. It's expensive. It's got low attack. The fact that it's poisonous is like, who cares? Even a card like Myexna from long ago in Naxxramas wasn't good, and she's way better than Wasteland Scorpan because she's just a little bit cheaper, which is really all you care about when you're looking at poisonous minions anyway, and she had almost as much health, and the attack value didn't matter. So this is slower than one of the weaker legendaries I can remember, and there's no reason anybody should ever run a card like this. I don't think there's a big beast hunter build out there that will ever make this work. So this card is bad right now, and it will remain bad. Sure, it might be okay in things like Arena, but we're talking specifically about Constructed here, and there's no reason for Wasteland Scorpan to exist, much like there was no reason for that terrible CGI to exist in The Mummy Returns. Moving on to Sunstruck Henchmen at the number 2 spot. Some people were looking at this card with promise, saying like, oh man, this could actually be really, really good in a Silence Priest, or the stats make up for the downside because you're only losing your attack half the time, your opponent's going to kill it for you. But in practice, it just doesn't work. And the stats confirm that. Even if you're still hopeful for this card, it just backfires so much. Your opponent can just leave it on board. You've committed a ton of mana to a card that doesn't do anything. The unreliability is such a big downside. There are other 4-drops with big stat lines too, like Soldier of Fortune, that's in the same standard format rotation as this card, and the downside there is not as bad, I would argue. Still not a great card either, by the way, but at least you have some control and influence over it, whereas with this card, you're just to the whims of RNG, and often that can backfire 2, 3, 4 turns in a row. You've never done anything. And although you could play this in like a Silence Priest, again, I think there are better minions for that, like maybe a Mirage Caller. Just going for Arcane Watchers or Ancient Watchers too. Like the stat lines aren't that different. So across the board, whenever you line this up against comparable cards, they all do something a little bit better, leaving Sunstruck Henchmen very much at the bottom of the pile. And then finally, the worst card, I would argue, in Saviors of Uldum. Another one that makes me a little sad, because we had a lot of fun with this on the launch day of the expansion. I did actually get a combo of this to go off. That video's on my YouTube channel somewhere. But it's Desert Obelisk, 5 mana 0/5. If you control 3 of these, at the end of your turn, deal 5 damage to a random enemy. So you have to summon 3 of these for it to really do anything, which is pretty darn tough, right? There are not a lot of ways to do that easily. Usually you have to spend a lot of prep time, setup time, mana, a lot of combo pieces in hand to even get that to happen. And then the sad thing is even when you get that to go off, it doesn't even kill your opponent. It's just dealing 15 total damage, much of it to the board. It doesn't only target the enemy hero. So even when I got like 7 damage, right? Or 7 of these on board, I should say, for 35 total damage, it's not even a guaranteed kill if they have a few minions out there. A few 1/1s could totally disrupt any combo potential. So because of the fact that this doesn't only go face, and it's so much work, it's like one of the most impossible combo setups ever. Way worse than a card like Mogu Cultist, which I think you can actually kind of get some payoff for, because Highkeeper Raw is so amazing. This is both a hard setup and a bad reward. You gotta have an amazing reward if the setup's gonna be this difficult. So Desert Obelisk just misses the mark in so many ways. It did give me one fun video, one fun deck, when the meta was completely wide open and everybody was playing bad decks. But anytime the meta settled, a card like this is just absolute and utter garbage, and in fact, the worst card in Saviors of Uldum. And there you go, folks. Those are the 10 worst Saviors of Uldum cards. Now, I know these kinds of videos trigger some people out there because you got a card you love. I'm sorry if I made you mad. I'm just going by the data from HS Replay here. I did shuffle the list around a little bit just based on my own interpretations. So some of the cards I was a little more hopeful for, I put near the, the top end of the list, the 10, 9, 7, 8 spots or whatever. The cards I think don't have any hopes and will never make sense are near the bottom of the list there, the 1s, the 2s, the 3s, etc. But I'm curious, what would you have done differently with this list? How would you have ordered things differently? Which of these cards do you think do have some hopes? What are people missing? Tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me why I'm right. Tell me what else should belong on this list, because you just can't get it to work. Want to hear all those thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, of course, please drop a subscription there on YouTube. It's helpful for me. We're making that final push to 100,000 maybe someday in the next year or two. And you'll get more fun videos like this one too, right? I do all kinds of these lists. So if you enjoyed it, you'll see more of those in the future. But that said, thanks so much for watching this time around. And until next time, game on.